Welcome to episode 16 of the Busy Pastor Podcast. My name is Greg Gibson. I'm here with my co-host, Trent Stewart, the lead pastor at Foothills Church. Today, we are talking about being busy with our finances. All right, episode 16 of the Busy Pastor Podcast. Man, it's been a great journey up to this point. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are so thankful for everyone who's continued to listen on multiple platforms, watching the Busy Pastor videos on YouTube. There's many ways to connect with the Busy Pastor. You can connect with our community by going to busypastor.org, signing up for more resources. And today, in this episode, Trent, we're talking about being busy in our finances, so stewarding our finances well.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what we're not trying to do first.
Yeah.
Because this is a tricky subject.
Sure. I mean, we can't give an in-depth theology of money here, and we're not going to dive into the prosperity gospel versus the poverty gospel. We're not going to be diving into like materialism in your heart right now.
Yeah.
We're gonna hit some practical points today and some practical applications for how you can really be busy stewarding your money and finances well. None of us got into ministry for the money.
If you did,
yeah,
joke's on you, man.
Joke's on you, bro. But we still need to know how to manage it well. And what if you do some things where God actually does bless? How do you manage that? And so that's really what we want to talk about.
In my experience, most pastors are not good with money. They're not good with managing money. You don't go to seminary and say, here's your three finance classes, finance 101, 201, 301. Here's all the things that you've got to do, now with how to fundraise. I mean, it's
unless you came from a family that had money, you watched your parents, and they taught you well, or maybe you got a finance degree, business degree, accounting degree, something like that before seminary. Or maybe you were in the business world and then God called you into ministry. Outside of those things, where do you learn that? How do you do it well?
And so, I think this is an important conversation for us. And I think just like the last two episodes when we talked about family, specifically in regards to marriage and parenting, we could do a whole month, long episodes on that. Mm-hmm. We could do
we will
multiple episodes. Yeah, we will. We can do multiple episodes on how to steward our finances. And so today is really just the tip of the iceberg. But we want to get you thinking about how to steward your money well, because let's talk about why, right? Why do we want to do that?
Well, God tells us to. When we look at Scripture, Jesus talked about money way more than he talked about other things. You've probably used this in one of your sermons, but he talked about belief in 272 verses. He talked about prayer in 271 verses. He talks about love in 714 verses. And then he talks about money and generosity, 2,162 verses.
Wow.
So it's important. It obviously is an issue. We all need to do it better. We don't just naturally know how to do this. Yeah. And so obviously I think it's important.
More than belief, prayer, and love combined.
Yeah.
Jesus talked about money. And I think, it's not only in my experience where pastors don't know how to deal with it or handle it or steward it. It's a messy gray area too. Mm-hmm. And so how to talk about it in a healthy way, how to disciple your church to think about it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
So where do we see Jesus talk about this in Scripture?
Several places. Just want to encourage you to read Luke chapter 16. Jesus tells a parable there about a manager, and he gets down into verse 10 as he begins to explain the meaning of the parable. And Jesus says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches?
Man. Yeah.
And that's a very startling couple of verses there.
Yeah.
And I think the implications for us as pastors are extremely heavy. And so I think what we learn in this, in the Scripture, specifically in this parable, is that obviously God owns everything.
That's right.
Right? We're managers of that. That means that we're accountable to what God has given to us. And so if I'm a manager of my time, my talents, and yes, my treasures, yes, the finances that God has given to me, that means that one day Jesus is going to hold me accountable to that. He wants us to understand that we are stewards. And so a steward, when I was growing up, my last name is Stewart, obviously, right? So my dad would talk about stewardship. And I'm like, why is he talking about being a steward? I think, that's our family. Why is he talking about our family like that? No, with a D, that means that you are taking care of things that belong to other people, or to someone else. And so the act of watching over someone else's stuff. And so that's helpful for us to constantly remind ourselves that we're not the owner of this. We're only managers of it. What God has given us doesn't belong to us. So we've got to manage it well. That means that we're going to be held accountable to this. And so the problem here is where, we fall into this. We don't know essentially how to manage financial burdens and budgets. And we're not great at thinking long term about college and, unexpected bills and family needs. Pastors and their spouses, we all often feel pressure to look like we have all that together. And then when we don't, people use it as a weapon against us. And so that becomes a very tense issue, I think, in the lives of pastors. We have a hard time sometimes buying something nice for ourselves or for our wife because we feel like we have to justify it, to other people, the personal purchases or expenses. We went on a vacation and you find yourself saying, well, we got a really good deal, or somebody let us, use their place, or, you buy a car and it's like, well, the guy, knows us and he gave us this. We're constantly justifying. Why do we do that?
Yeah.
Why do we feel that tension to justify? And I think it's obvious, a lot of different reasons. Sometimes we have, made mistakes. And so there's credit card debt, right? And then maybe there are student loans when you got married that you didn't know your spouse had, and now you've got these student loans. We don't think really about retirement. How do we prepare financially for the future? We've got maybe you've got the annuity board, or, Guidestone, or maybe you've got a 401k, but outside of that, what else do pastors do? Which means, we have a lot of concern financially, and there's a lot of tension financially. But if we're not doing any of that well, if we don't know how to do that, if maybe we're not even giving to our church, now all of a sudden we tend not to preach about those things.
Yeah.
We don't preach about generosity or stewardship, typically because we don't tend to preach about things that we ourselves aren't good at. And so if you can't stand from the stage, the pulpit, and preach on generosity and money, why have we allowed that tension in our life to develop? Maybe it's because we're not doing it well. And we've got to get a hold of that, because our people need to know what the biblical way of managing resources looks like.
So one of the things that I love about this conversation, which you mentioned a moment ago, is yes, God calls us to steward these things. And stewardship, as we have defined it right now, is just managing what has been given to us. So stewarding something or watching something on someone else's behalf. And we really pulled this out of Luke chapter 16. Also, I love the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, where Jesus begins to add to this conversation and add to this definition of stewardship. So we have these three guys, right, in this parable that work for their master. The first one takes 5 talents and turns it into 5. The second one takes 2 and turns it into 4. But the third one, buries it in the field. And what's praised by the master is the guy who turns the little into more. Right. And I think when we think about money and stewardship, I love this definition from this story that Jesus gives us, because stewardship, yes, is taking care of what has been given to us, but then also having the ability and wherewithal to turn it into more. And I love You know what Proverbs says about this? The prudent who leaves a financial legacy for his children's children. And if we think about this in stages, one, pastors have to get good at just managing what they've been given. And then they have to get good. We have to get good at turning it into more,
right?
Not just for our family, but for our churches as well.
Absolutely. And that goes back to, this idea of what Jesus says, if you're not trustworthy in little, how can you be expected to handle more? And so no matter how much we have, no matter what God has blessed us with, we want to be found trustworthy in dealing with the worldly wealth that he gives to us so that he can entrust to us true riches. And so in order to do that, we've got to begin to learn and grow in these areas, because we're going to need mentors. We're going to have to read books.
That's right.
We're going to have to pray through this. We're going to have trial and error. You're going to invest in some things and do some things that probably, don't pan out, and where you get burnt. Maybe some guys, maybe we start here. Like, there are some guys who are in some heavy debt. I mean, statistically, Americans, are $8,000 in credit card debt. Maybe you've got student loans. How can we help guys overcome that debt?
That's right.
And start moving? Now, obviously, turn to Dave Ramsey. He can help you get out of debt. But I think at the very least, what I would hope that you would do is get to this, I think, an overarching goal of you would give 10% to God, give 10% to your church, you would save 10%, and then you would begin to live off the rest.
Right.
And I think if especially if you're
at the very foundation.
The very foundation.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a young pastor getting into ministry, like, start now with that philosophy, and you'll save yourself a lot of trouble in the future. If you do have credit card debt, I think, some practical things. Call your credit card company today and say, hey, can you lower the APR? And 9 times out of 10, they'll take that, whatever high percentage you have, and they'll lower it, and boom, you've just saved some money. If you haven't done this, tell your accountant at your church, when you direct deposit, hopefully you're getting direct deposits by now, but direct deposit your income every week, take a certain percentage and put it directly into your savings account.
Yes.
So that you don't even touch it. It's not even in your account. You don't see it there. That way you can begin to automate it so that, you don't have the tension of trying to spend it, and you're automating it. And so these are just practical things. Yeah. The debt snowball, maybe that's one thing you got to do. Take the lowest debt and knock it out, and then kind of grow from there. But overall, we want to get to a point to where we're actually being good managers of what God has given to us.
Yeah. So to go back to that, at the very least, if we have debt right now, credit card debt, we want to tackle that. We want to steward what we've been given. And Dave Ramsey, like you said, is a at the very baseline, foundational, a great place to start in how to manage debts. But I would say this, and I think maybe there's some room for this conversation, Trent, as well, is thinking about the legacy that you want to leave. So beginning to think about planning ahead.
Yeah.
So I think probably a lot of pastors listening, they've got a budget. Yeah, they give to their church. Yeah, they're probably saving. But we recently just went through the story of Ruth, back last fall. And I love the story of Boaz, right? And Boaz is a business guy, yes. But if you remember, and this is one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament, but he has room in his life to care for people. And I think pastors, we are leaders. So we want to be busy with the right things. That's the purpose of this podcast. And so if we are seen in a specific light and we're working to be healthy as a leader, we're also working to be healthy with our finances and have a goal where we're one day creating room to also be able to do the things like Boaz did. So if you remember, he leaves the margins of his field for the marginalized. So the poor, the homeless, the oppressed, they're gleaning from his field. And he has the bandwidth and margin to care for Ruth and Naomi.
Yes.
So I don't know about you, but I I long to be that type of man, pastor and leader.
Yeah.
Where I've got the bandwidth, not just within my time and schedule, but bandwidth in my resources. When God presents opportunities to use the things that he's given me for the good of other people, I want to be able to do that well.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to do that with an open hand.
Yeah, absolutely. The scripture calls Boaz a worthy man.
Worthy man.
And
I love that.
I just want to, you want to lean into that. He is obviously a righteous man. He was also a wealthy man, but you see him taking care of other people.
That's right.
And had he not been a faithful steward caring for his business, maybe God doesn't use him. Maybe God uses someone else. He misses the blessing. He misses the opportunity, to experience this grand story with Ruth and being in the lineage and line of the Messiah. And so, absolutely, how do we create margin? How do you create margin? Well, I think obviously we can't spend more than we make.
That's right. If we're always playing catch up, we will never have margin in our life to do those types of things.
You cannot. So you've got to have margin. You've got to live within your means. And that's like number one. Like we just have to live within our means, and we have to, be content with what God has given to us. And then at the same time, pastors sometimes put themselves in a box. Like this is the only thing I can do.
Right.
But what we've seen over the last several years are what people are calling side hustles.
Yeah, and absolutely.
So I don't know very many people that just have one job, especially during COVID. They have their job, but they're also doing a couple other things. And people have their hands in multiple revenue streams. And so I've seen a lot of pastors do that as well. And so whether that is their writing ministry, their speaking ministry, they're writing books, they're speaking at other places, they're involved in their denomination. And so there's different incomes that are coming in that God can use. And when that happens, we have to be good and faithful stewards with them when they come.
Yeah. And so that's one question that I want to talk about here, because I think probably a lot of pastors listening are saying that, right? They're saying, I'm doing these things at the very least. Again, if you're not, start there. Don't play catch up. Let's live within our means, and let's give well and then create margin. But they're probably also thinking about the side hustle a little bit, And so, man, quick question: is it wrong to have a side hustle?
That's a great question. I think the terminology might be new, but pastors have been doing this for a long time. I think as long as it doesn't interfere with your duties as a pastor of a church, what you do on your own time, I think is God can use. And so a lot of times, whether it's a sermon you write that you preached and somebody wants to have you at their church or at their conference or whatever, guys do that all the time. They've been doing that for a long time, and they get paid to do that. Good for them.
Yeah.
Musicians, they write music and they stream their music, and they're getting paid to do that. And so that's been going on for years. And so today there are just multiple ways for pastors to use their giftedness and to use really the talents that God has given to them to be able to do multiple different things. And we see this in the New Testament as well. Paul was a tent maker.
That's right.
And he made tents, so he got paid to do that, and he was in ministry, and the church was giving him funds to give to other churches. He was raising funds. And so this is part of what we see in the New Testament. So is it wrong? Of course not. It's not wrong. I think if a guy is doing too much in one area, that he's neglecting his pastoral duties, then that's where I think the gray area is. I think that's where the problem would come in.
Yeah, like you said, I think it all depends on the motives of someone's heart.
Yeah.
And then their ability to steward their own time and schedule.
Yeah.
And lead themselves in that way. And like you said, we don't want to take away from ministry priorities. We want to still continue to lead in our signature ministries well. If you go back and listen to the Signature Ministries of a Pastor episode, where we talk about even how to be busy in those right areas. But when it comes to these side hustles, yeah, I mean, the Apostle Paul did this to fund his ministry, partnered with churches to fund his ministry. And I think what's unique about pastors, and I'll say this before I say what's unique about pastors, there's probably a lot of pastors listening who are already doing this, and it's because they have to.
Yeah.
They're bivocational, or I've seen this term co-vocational pastors, co-vocational church planting being thrown around a lot, where you are working kind of a marketplace job or 9 to 5 and trying to bootstrap a church plant into existence. Man, keep going. We are in your corner. There, you keep doing what you are doing, and we are behind you. But I think there's an amazing thing about pastors, right? Is that we are we have an ability, because we are leaders and because we think strategically. We have the ability to kind of cross different industries. And so I think there's even a conversation to say, okay, if you are developing side hustles and you're doing it in the right way, maybe it's not through your writing and speaking ministry, but you have an ability as a leader to solve problems, or you have an ability to get people excited about this thing, or to connect people, and however you use that. Right?
Yeah, you may not have a skill that the community needs.
Exactly.
So, if you're an electrician or you're a plumber, or you can flip houses. I mean, that's a skill set in and of itself. And so those things can be used. And what's helpful for me in terms of this is like when I'm involved in things like that. It puts me in an incredibly different environment. Now, all of a sudden, I'm around people in the community that have never gone to church, that don't even know I'm a pastor. And so it gives me a whole nother vein of ministry to like operate in. Whereas if I'm only in the walls of this building, every single day, every hour of my life, all I'm around is Christians all the time. And so things like that help me get outside. But, a thing that I think is also important for us as pastors to start thinking about is we are in a unique time in history. Think about, where we're at ever since really, post-industrial revolution to where we're at. In the history of the church, it's never been like this for pastors, where we can live a relatively middle-class lifestyle and only be a pastor.
Yes.
I mean, you think about that. That's never been true in the history of the church. And it's not true right now outside of America. Maybe in some other first world, you can do that. But it's very unique that we can get paid by a church, live a middle-class lifestyle right now in America. And as our country begins to shift and change and move in a more secular way, how long is this going to last, Greg? I mean, how long is it going to be that this is true? And if the next generation, or maybe the next generation after that, is it not going to be called a side hustle? It's going to be called life. Like if you want to be a pastor, you're going to have a full paying job that then allows you to preach and be in ministry. I don't know if we're far from that.
Right. And so, which is all the more importance for this conversation to be had right now.
Exactly.
So as pastors, we want to be busy with the right things. That means we want to be busy with our finances. We don't want ministry and finances to be messy. We want to manage and steward them well. We want to teach our church to think about finances and stewardship well. And hopefully, as we talked about a moment ago, we can leave a financial legacy, not just for our children, but for our children's children. As we close today's episode, we want to invite you to do a few things. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Busy Pastor. And secondly, if you like today's episode, subscribe to The Busy Pastor and leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more resources, join the Busy Pastor community by going to busypastor.org. Next week, we are talking about being busy in our sex life. Until then, let's be busy with the right things. Thank you so much for tuning into our YouTube page. Hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and don't forget to comment below.
New episodes come out every Thursday. For more content and to join the Busy Pastor community, visit busypastor.org.